Right, okay, I think we will start. So welcome everybody. My name's Andrew Laird. I'm the Chief Executive of Mutual Ventures. We're a consultancy that works with public services to support people services and the development of really great places as well. And I'm really delighted to say I'm joined by Professor Donna, who, among other things, is the former Chief Executive of Wigan, the Chair of the amazing Adult Social Care Social Enterprise Possibilities, and also I'm really proud to say a non-executive director at Mutual Ventures. And I'll be asking Donna to come in and share her thoughts later on. I'm also delighted to be joined by Mark Smith. Mark is the Director of Public Service Reform at Gateshead and also very much involved in the Changing Futures Northumbria programme. And Mark won't like me saying this, but he's becoming a bit of a public service reform superstar at the minute with his work on the Liberated Method. And we're going to get Mark to tell us a bit about that. This webinar is about new radical approaches to leadership and practice in public services. I think all of us here will know that things aren't working as they should, and we're going to get into some of the really great thinking that Mark is doing and get some of Donna's reflections as well. So before we start, just some housekeeping. This is being recorded, and if you've registered, which you'll, because you're here, we'll send out an email afterwards with a link to the recording. If you want to ask a question, you won't be able to ask it live because there's a lot of people here. So what you can do is put a question into the Q&A function at the bottom, and I'll do my best to try and get to as many of those as possible. So just in terms of the background context, so when Donna joined Mutual Ventures as a non-exec, we immediately started having a conversation about what makes a great place and place leadership. And, you know, in theory, integrated care systems and integrated care boards, the place leads, which sit alongside and under those, could be great. But in practice, services are quite often still siloed, and leaders are still very focused on their own organizations. And it's not very relational. Relationships are not valued as much as they should. And we started to think about what we could do at Mutual Ventures to try and support better leadership. So we came up with this concept of radical place leadership that would be very community-centered, that would be able to apply common sense, would be really focused on relationships with the ultimate ambition of trying to get more prevention into the system. And we were inspired by things like Total Place, which many of you will have heard of and remember fondly, perhaps, the Wigan deal, obviously, and obviously the work that Mark's been doing in Changing Futures Northumbria. And we were looking at this through a lens of three things, really: place leadership, public service staff, and communities, and how they could all work together to have a common vision, an appreciation of a place's strengths and challenges, and a really honest appraisal of where a place is in terms of its cohesion as a place and its place leadership. So in parallel with this, I'm really pleased that Donna introduced me to Mark as well. Mark very kindly agreed to be a guest on my Radical Reformers podcast. And it became really clear that the work that Mark was doing in Gateshead, which he will tell you about, and his work on the Liberated Method, was looking at practice in the same way that Donna and I were trying to look at leadership, with an emphasis on relationships and creating really great places, and actually moving away from a focus on services towards supporting a person. So that's all I was going to say as an introduction. I know you're all here to hear from Mark, so I'm going to quickly again welcome everybody who has joined. I think that's probably everybody on board now. So Mark, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can tell us about the work that you've been doing, and then I'll ask Donna for her response.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Okay, let's go with the whole screen sharing thing. We had a go, we had a practice, it seemed to work.
We have practiced, it did work.
Yeah, so let's have a look. So, can you see all of that? Because I can't see any of it.
That's good.
Brilliant. Right then, so I've got to try and do 20 minutes, and Andrew is going to be very brusque with me if I go over it. So there's a lot of material here. I'll do my best to squeeze it in. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the Liberated Method that we're developing within Changing Futures Northumbria, which is a government-funded project to help adults with multiple and complex needs. But this work's been growing for a while in Gateshead, and has its roots in some stuff that I did previously. So basically, we're going to talk a bit about what the method is, also where we are now in terms of what it's like for people that have got quite a lot going on in their lives and how we're routinely failing them at great cost. And also what that, as a series of provocations, what we need to do about that collectively as people working in public and voluntary sector organisations, but as members of society as well. But also a bit of a challenge to the kind of system change world and industry, because I've come from a systems thinking background. I used to work at Vanguard and some amazing work that they do. But the idea that if we change the system, then everything will be fine. We've actually come across evidence to suggest it's not really as simple as that. And the rising tide doesn't lift all boats when it comes to the whole notion of systems change. There are things we can do right now. And I'm going to talk a bit about that. So what is the Liberated Method? Essentially, it is a combination of rules and principles that we use. If you have a rule-based system only, you end up essentially with protocols and pathways, and that's a silo sort of line on its side, isn't it, really? We just do it this way. What we found is by combining rules and principles, it enables a massive amount of variety so that we can help people. And if nothing varies quite like people. So we need to be able to work that way. What we're finding is that if it's bespoke by default, it's effective and it costs less. Bespoke sounds expensive, doesn't it? It isn't. And what we've done is we've been very strong on our purpose, and the purpose initially was about helping people to thrive, help me thrive. And what we've learned is it's more subtle than that. It's about helping people access their internal capability to thrive, because who are we to determine what thriving looks like? So I'm going to start by talking about the existing system through the eyes of John. So here's a little bit of John's history. So John is somebody we're working with now, and he gave us his permission. He told us his story of his life and his interaction with services. And John enabled us to then access all the data, gave us permission to share it, to access it. And we had to get 14 data sharing agreements to get all this data about his life. And this is a zoom in as part of his history. Now, these are lots of presentations to A&E and to various inpatient episodes and various other things. Just one of those orange boxes for you and me would be like a very memorable life event, wouldn't it? We'd remember that. And this is the slides I'm about to show you are all from John's history, and none of them overlap. So here's a bit more. So there's more A&E incidences, transfer between hospitals, inpatient, or you can see, you can read. There's a story behind every single one of these boxes, and the lines connect incidents. So there's offences or issues which go from and to each of these boxes. So there's a little bit of John's history, and here's a bit more, and here's a bit more. We're into mental health now. Lots of assessments. We're going to talk a bit about assessment later on. And assessment basically is for us. It's not for him. How much of what we do can we do to you? How much of what we have can we give to you? Which is not the same as what does good for you look like. There's some mental health stuff, a bit more. Yeah, there's a suicide attempt there. Police now into the criminal justice system. There's loads of bits there, and there's more there. And the prison system, and there's some police call out. You get any idea, I'm guessing. Again, no overlap in any of this. We're into adult social care now. And when you zoom out, it looks like this. So on the left is a compression of, I think it's 9 years of John's history. And then you see a lot of white space, and that white space is us. So you'll notice in the top, there's a top row, that's Changing Futures Northumbria. What we did was worked with him bespoke based on a relationship. And what we found is a whole bunch of things matter to him that weren't very doable within the constraints of the current system. So what we've got below are a series of swim lanes. So there's health, criminal justice system, mental health, housing, social care, etc. So each of those sort of lanes. And what we could see from this is that some of what they do, he needed. You'll see the white space on the right isn't empty, but much of what was needed was essentially bespoke. And we crafted it with him. And it unlocked so much capacity and capability, and it made life better for him. So just some summary statistics. So before we got involved with John, we, as a minimum, because we haven't yet actually got probation's data yet, 3,500 nigh on interactions, 3,500 opportunities to get to know John. He'd been 1,000 plus interactions with the health system and with the criminal justice system. He was the #1 attendee at A&E in Gateshead. In fact, the consultant there kind of knows him. She's known him for 14 years. And when he stopped turning up, she thought he'd died. When she learned that he hadn't, we ended up setting up a Changing Futures touchpoint up in A&E to work this way, because she wanted to know more about how we'd done what we'd done. Throughout that consumption period there, of John's history, £2 million spent as a minimum on this. And throughout that period, his life got worse. His addiction to alcohol got worse. His mental health got worse. His physical health got worse. His relationships became either non-existent or toxic, and it was awful. I say the royal we. I know Ron Charlton's on this call. He's the guy that did all this work, so take a bow, Ron. What we found when we worked with John was that, I mean, this is a moving target because we're still working with him, but in a year we've worked with him, 161 interactions, with housing being a critical one, 116 attendances in A&E. Even 6 months before we got hold of him, went to 7 in a year, and none of them resulted in an admission. Most of the interactions, as you can see at the top right line, are bespoke. He's in recovery now. He's sober. He's got a community around him. That's an important word. His consumption is declining. His welfare is increasing. The project has spent around about 30k. There's been other similar spend outside the project in the system. But A, it's far less, and B, it's far better. So when you look at it that way, what is going on here? It would be remiss of me just to describe John as a series of interactions. You know, we know John's story, and one of the things that he likes to do is to journal, to write, and he likes doing it on cards. So the team gave him a load of cards, and he'll just write them out and he'll give them to the team, just as a way of expressing himself. And these are the sorts of things that if you have a relationship with somebody, you understand it. And it makes a difference to his building of his own internal capacity. And if you don't work on that, you're just going to keep transacting forever. So what we would describe as going on in the left-hand part of that diagram is what £2 million worth of John's consumption looks like, and all the other people that we're working with. And there's many others like him with many similar stories. So if you're that person in the middle and you've got a bunch of things that you need help with, then there are a bunch of specialisms, the little blue dots, that can help you. And they are clinical, they're housing, social care, who knows. And the arrangement on the left is predicated on the fact that what you need is a sort of magic combination of those things. And if you get that, you'll be okay. And what that does is it creates, it takes out the nuance. You know, what are the things that actually aren't describable through those specialisms that would really help me? But also accessing those things is very difficult. Now, the green lines there are presentations. I can present to each of these areas to get some help, or I can present to some and they can refer me to others, which are the little black dotted lines. And whether it's a presentation or a referral, there's some eligibility criteria to get through. So imagine that you've got 3 problems. There are probably about 6 different routes between referrals and presentations, but imagine you've got several. And even if you know where those specialisms are, you're going to have trouble accessing them. It's a nightmare. So what we tend to do is say, well, we'll put a navigator in to help you do that. And whilst that might be helpful, it institutionalizes this design problem, and it doesn't solve the unmet need issue. So we're just essentially making it a slightly slicker version of not great. So what we've done on the right instead is that we've liberated the method, and we'll come on to why we call it that in a moment. So we pair up the person that we're trying to help with a worker who can either be, or can be both actually, a caseworker who tends to have a professional background. Like we've got probation officers, CPNs, benefits experts, of all smart and angry people that are fed up with the current system that are now working with us with a broader remit. And their job is to build a relationship with that person and to work out what matters to them. which is a far better question than what do you want or what can we give you? And all those black dots are those little things that make a big difference. Like we sorted Craig, one of our clients, we sorted his teeth out because before we actually got him somewhere to live, because he had a gap in his teeth, in the front teeth, it was very visible. He put his tongue through the gap every morning, feel sad, grab a drink and go out and offend. So first thing we said, well, why don't we sort your teeth out? And that required a specialism on pool, but it required context. And if we don't have that context, we don't know, do we? And by doing that, he was able to build and layer on more confidence and start to be part of his own solution. And you don't see that assess, do, refer stuff that you saw on the left. So we're moving from navigation to relationships, and those generalist roles have low caseloads. And I know there's the beginnings of, well, how is that sustainable? Well, think back to that diagram and ask, how is that sustainable? So what we're seeing essentially is everything on the left is what happened on that clump. And it's a very crude slide, but everything inside that, what matters to me stuff, the contextual stuff, is what the team were doing. But they were also pulling on specialists to do the stuff that they needed to do, but with context. And it was clear they needed far less of it, and it was able to, and it worked basically. So the Liberated Method, what we basically do is we say to our teams, you've just got two rules, which is don't break the law and don't do any harm. And you do anything else you like. But what's happened is we've iterated a series of principles. So, and it's called the Liberated Method because that's what the staff called it. They named it that. Oh, this is quite liberating. It's like a liberated method. I thought, well, I'm having that. And that's what it's called. And the 5 principles are, we understand people rather than assess them. And the reason they're principles is sometimes we have to do the thing that we say we're not going to do. Sometimes we have to do an assessment because the law says we do, but we do it in context and we don't turn off understanding. But where we can, we understand, not assess. The person sets the scope. Actually, that's iterated. It's the relationship between the person and their caseworker sets the scope of the work, which means nothing's off the table provided it's legal and doesn't do any harm. So we've had people dog grooming, carpentry, learning the guitar, whatever matters. The decisions are made in the work, so this leans heavily on the work I did at Vanguard, and actually that's held, that hasn't really iterated. Why should I make a decision as director for somebody? I don't know the people that we're working with. The decisions are in the work. We try to pull for help rather than refer people onto specialists, but we know sometimes we have to refer. If we do not let go. And the final principle is we don't set any time limits, because when you start putting arbitrary time limits on things, you're essentially constraining your method. And we don't want to do that. Now, critically, the Liberated Method is not about the provision of services. We've got to stop talking about service improvement. What we do is we combine the extrinsic support that we provide with the intrinsic capability for people to manage their own future. And that intrinsic thing is about their own personal self and their community that they're in, or the community they may find, like John has found a community. So if somebody's on the left of that diagram and in crisis, there's no hope, they don't care, they're in a hole, and it's a lot of high support at that end. It is a lot of extrinsic input. We're just going to have to keep you alive. We're going to have to stop you jumping off the bridge, and that's not hyperbole. This is what's happening. And when we start doing very functional, unglamorous stuff just to get somebody through the day, their intrinsic sort of capability starts to show itself. So it's active agency. The agency is always there, but it starts to show itself. And then our practice changes. It becomes more high support, high challenge, because we're working with a lot of our staff have got lived experience. So they're able to sort of stop people getting sucked into loops and to work with them bespoke on what matters to them. So the intrinsic stuff starts to grow. They're taking more control, and it gets to a point where they're still vulnerable and wobbling, that may well be in the early days of recovery, say, and they're going to need some stuff from us. And then eventually that falls away to either a managed equilibrium, like we're always going to need to be there a little bit, or not at all. And what's interesting about the Liberated Method is it doesn't always start on the left. So Juliet in the middle had a whole bunch of capacity and capability, but she was struggling with some debt issues. And we worked with her very specifically on some stuff around the benefits, some school uniform for a lad, and some stuff around housing, which she just couldn't do. And as soon as we cleared the runway, as she called it, she got a job back, she got promoted, she really reconnected with her sister, and off she went. Now, if we run services on the basis that it's extrinsic only, what we do is everything, and we're not paying attention to that stuff in green, we just get people locked into cycles of provision, and we're not building capability. And that's the joy of the work. I mean, it's about building up that intrinsic capability at the rate that works for the relationship between a worker and a citizen. So that sounds really bloody obvious, doesn't it? So why is that so difficult to do? Well, when we studied John's history and that of others, we looked at all the decisions that have been made in that £2 million worth of consumption. That's, all of them, and some others too. And we looked at what was driving what. Why would we do that? Why would we turn somebody away that had a risk, had a need? And the answer was, in that case, well, because we're worried about a risk, what if rather than what is. And all of it culminates in one superordinate thing, which is the desire to create and maintain a defensible position. So that's how public services are created. And that has two broad forms. One is, I need to demonstrate a prudent use of resources by saying no up until nobody else blinks and I have to blink and say yes. Or I've got to stick to a de facto purpose. And the problem with that is that the purposes across the different elements of the system are different. There's nothing wrong with them per se, but in combination, they're not helpful. So, and that's an hour presentation on its own. But you can see there's cycles of assess, do, refer, which lock in consumption. There's risk always seems to trump need because we're worried about a purpose. The way we do improvement is all about efficiency and not about efficacy. So we lose nuance and context. And that's what we need to work out what the answer is with people. And we tend to default to no and resort to yes. So in when the stakes of inaction for us outweigh the stakes of actually committing resources, we'll do something. So we say, come back when you're worse, and then people do. What we've also done is look at what we did. Now, this is, don't worry, this isn't a flowchart we gave to our workers. This is us studying their journals, talking to them and saying, well, that great stuff you did with John and with Brian and with all the others, what does that look like? And it looks like this. So they're able, the leadership was different, the focus on efficacy rather than efficiency, understanding context rather than worrying about compliance, and working differently with partners, and the status of that generalist role, having real clout with the specialists, and all the stuff that's in there, which I won't go through in detail now. That's what it looks like when you map it. So again, this stuff is as old as time. We're building relationships with people and working on what matters to them. Well, that's hardly revolutionary. But there's a reason it's not possible right now. And we've got to work on these things, not just on the liberated method. So there is a financial stalemate in the system at the moment whereby if, let's take adult social care, were to invest in prevention, the main beneficiaries of that would be the health service. Do you think for a moment the money that saves in the health service would flow back into the adult social care system? No, of course it wouldn't. So why would adult social care bother? They're tight enough as it is. So what they reasonably, plausibly do instead is to invest internally in their own efficiency. But that gets us nowhere. Plus, when you do start saying yes, when you previously say no, demand will go up before it falls, and it falls massively. But no one can even absorb that upturn before it drops because everything is so tight. So we need the ability for money to move, but we are now so far through the looking glass with this, we need some actual reform money. We've got to invest in this. How we do change has to change as well. We've got an efficiency mindset that's completely backfired because you can't be efficient if you're not effective. And we've created all this idea that standardization and predictability is helpful. People can absorb variety, so let them. If they do that, they'll waste very little and do great work. But we need to then lead that way and not through this compliance route, which is understandable given the system pressures. We need to look at the way we lead. Same with commissioning. We essentially set the exam question up front, and anything that comes outside of that is difficult to do. And what we've learned is it usually does. And the way we use data is critical as well. We tend to look at lagging measures, what happened there. We look at efficacy and we look at compliance, we look at efficiency and compliance. There are very few measures of efficacy, very few places where you can say, how effective was that thing you did? We can look at what it cost and we look at how compliant it was. So the liberated method cannot just work in operations. We've got to work across these things too, and that's what we're doing. So if we're going to make this normal, I don't know where I'm rushing this, but what do we need? those generalist roles are key. If you've got people with low caseloads who are able to do this, then we can start to take out loads and loads of capacity and realign it. Where are you getting these people from, Mark? I hear you cry. We've already got them, but they're doing loads of stuff that was on the left of that diagram. Housing officers, environmental health officers, benefits people, the citizens advice. There's people in both voluntary and public sector that can do this, that would love to do this, but they're locked into something else. The money needs to be able to move. We need to commission differently. And yes, we need to think differently about how we use our data. Who's in crisis now? Who's predictably going to be? What can we do to keep people from ever being in that position? And we work on all those things at the same time. We can't just focus on the acute. And finally, I'm Director of Public Service Reform at Gateshead, but public service reform is not enough. We need to look at the way we study and change public services. The methods of learning and improving need to be built in, but also we need to look at people's personal and community development. The intrinsic stuff is so important. The people who have worked through the recovery community barely touched a service, but they've transformed their lives. So what can we learn from that? We need to intersect all three. And I think I'm calling it transcendent. It's based on relationships. It's beyond any single organisation's reach. If any single organisation thinks it's got the ability to reform public services, it's kidding itself. And because of the stalemate that we're in, we need to have some internal consistency from operations right through to governance and finance. And we would make the argument now that you need a specific body to do it that's owned by all of us. So the ICB and the local authorities and the voluntary sector and central government need to kind of create some capacity and capability to move from one state to the other, because we can't do this as we are whilst keeping the shop open and dealing with demand. So this notion of relational public services needs to be, to my mind, the way forward, and that's what the Liberated Method points us towards. Final slide. There's a couple of articles on our Changing Futures Northumbria website. One's written by me on the right, the Liberated Method stuff, and the idea of an institute I've co-written with Professor Hannah Hesselgreaves from Northumbria University. So there's some more reading on there if you want. Also, we're looking to put an event on early next year around liberating public services. So we'd love to talk to people about what they'd want from that. So that was very whistle stop, but I hope that was helpful.
Really helpful, Mark. Thank you very much. And yeah, loads of questions coming in already. Before I bring in Donna, there's just a really quick one that I think we can deal with now. Somebody was asking how the initial 2 million versus the post-liberated cost was calculated. I'm guessing that's just adding up all of the interventions and the associated costs.
Yeah, there is no perfect way of doing it. So all we've done is show our working. So what we've been able to do is get all of those interactions, take what the unit costs are based on research that's been done elsewhere. Ron's on the call, but I don't want to pull him in now. We can send people all of the working around that. But what I would say is it's a minimum. We know it's more.
Yeah.
My brief to Ron was, we don't blow this up. If anything, we err on the side of low, because what I don't want to do is kind of overblow this. But 3,500 interactions, irrefutable. It's there.
Yeah.
And even if you took a very basic view on what they cost, you're coming up at 2 million. We know it's more. There's a load of immeasurable stuff that happened. So we can share that with you, but that number is something we're very solid on.
Thank you very much, Mark. Donna, I'd like to bring you in now.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And that was amazing, Mark. Thank you. Really excellent overview. And all the time you were talking, I was just thinking, why isn't this normal? You know, why isn't this just how public services operate? It makes perfect sense. It is completely, it's as old as time. It's just sensible. It's human. It gets to the heart of what people need, the kind of support that they need. The outcomes are better. The cost is hugely lower. And staff are much happier because it reconnects them with the reason they became public servants, I think, which certainly that's what happened in Wigan, was it reminded them that they didn't join to introduce eligibility criteria and to ration services and to look at everything through a deficit lens. I remember one conversation with eating disorder services in Wigan was around, you know, your BMI, body mass index, is too high. Go away, lose more weight, and then when you come back, we can help you then, because you will be able to access our very narrow menu of services that we've designed in a darkened room that we think will help you. You know, and that you've explained that perfectly, that it doesn't work. We also know where John is before John presents to A&E, you know, through things like risk stratification and different use of data, as you've described. So it's even more criminal because we just let it happen very often. We wait for John to come to A&E. We wait for John to try to take his own life. You know, we wait for all these services very often to assess him. And that's where we spend most of our time, is assessing John. 80% of our time on average, we found in Wigan, we were spending on assessment and then referring on to somebody else, when really we need to shift that so that the bulk of the time that we as public servants spend with people is on supporting them, finding what they love, you know, an asset-based approach, as we used to call it in Wigan, and building on their strengths. Everyone has strengths, and very often we just see everything through a deficit. You're not in education, employment, or training. You're neat. You know, you're a bed blocker. What do they call them now? No reason to reside in a hospital. You know, we've just got to change the whole narrative. But this is hard, Mark, and, you know, I know that I'm sure, and we've never discussed this aspect of it, but I'm sure it's not been easy to get this accepted within your own organisation, within Gateshead Council and across the system. And I think it is because people do operate in those silent deficit. I think the way you've described it is perfect, silo deficit-based little funnels that don't really think person, they think service, they think my services. And people don't start out in public services wanting to be like that, but the kind of system makes them become like that. I mean, I support, as well as being a NED with Andrew, I support quite a few integrated care systems up and down the country. And I think the work that you're doing in yours is the best I've seen, I'll be honest. It really is amazing. Because, you know, when you're given a challenge of find 30% savings that ICBs were given last year, you know, instead of just cutting services, slashing commissioning budgets, thinking about what people can't have, you know, you've taken a different approach. You know, you've thought hard about, you know, the person-centered services. And I don't think very many others have, I'll be honest. They've thought about ways of cutbacks that don't actually make a saving in the end. In fact, some of those cutbacks will probably contribute to further cost down the line. So taking that whole person, whole system, you know, genuine inter-organizational approach. But why is it not normal? You know, that's the question. The question I used to keep being asked when we would get visits to Wigan from like the Scottish government and, you know, the Danish government and all these people that would come to Wigan. Very few from Greater Manchester, actually. A bit of not invented here, I think. I know there's some colleagues on the call from GM at the moment, but there's this thing that we have to create our own. Well, yeah, I think people do, but some of the thinking here from you is replicable, I think. And people should be seizing it. But there's a fear factor around it. And what I think you tend to find, particularly from leaders and I would say managers in roles who are fierce protectors of budgets, status, power, they don't want to let go because it involves a loss of power on their part. So I think you need a different type of leadership. It isn't radical, as we said before the call started. It should be normal. It's human. And one of the things I said at a recent event was, you know, it's only the rebel alliance of people within organisations. You're definitely in the rebel alliance in Gateshead and Northumbria. You know, you're chomping at the bit, and it just needs a few people like that to see the light, to see where the money's going, to see where the cost is going, to see where the outcomes are poor and where we could work better around John. I mean, that's criminal. Those slides should make us all severely anxious about our roles in public services and passionate about having a radical place approach. You know, we had something similar, 7 integrated place-based teams in Wigan, and we said, just do whatever the person needs or their family, just do it, you know, and keep people safe. And as long as no one dies, you've got to try new things, because the one thing that's guaranteed to be high risk is to not do anything. is to continue with that ridiculous set of slides and interventions. You know, it makes a mockery of all of us, doesn't it? That it really does need completely shaking up and just normalizing, just being the way that we work 365 days a year, not having these separate professions beating each other up, not having these nicely governed integrated care systems that spent the first year just concentrating on governance and not doing anything, and then making 30% of savings without, again, really radically thinking about where cost is going. You know, a good accountant, I don't know if there's any accountants on the call, would ask, where is cost coming from? You know, and the cost is coming from our complete inability to work together around the person. So, you know, let's do it. Let's all be members of the Rebel Alliance. Let's liberate our staff to remind them why they became public servants. Let's liberate ourselves, you know, as system leaders, as policy people, as people trying to make a difference. You know, one of the great things about you, Mark, is you're on the coalface. You know, you're not somebody telling us how to do it who's never done it. You're doing it now. You know, you've got real life case studies. So it's absolutely fantastic. And anything I can do or we can do at MV to support you, we will. So, yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Donna. That's fantastic. If you could just go on mute, you've done that now. Can I just get somebody to put a message up? I've got quite a few messages at the start saying that I was echoey. Mark wasn't, but I hope it's okay now. So I'm going to jump straight into questions now. And I'm not going to give the name of the people who've posted the questions because I haven't asked permission to do that. So if you hear your question, apologies that I won't attribute it to you. There's 3 that have come in that I think are quite closely related. So one is about how you create the enabling environment for this. And I know if you read the papers that Mark's written, one of the things that Mark quite clearly says is that the liberated method is not compatible in the current way services are organized. So one of the questions is, what have you learned about system change and this being a threat to certain leaders and how they might see it as a threat and how you deal with that? There's another one also linked about how do you get political support for this type of thing? Because obviously there is the risk of, well, it feels instinctively for a lot of people that this will be more difficult to manage risk through. Now, I know that you'll have a good answer to that and that you might get pushback. So if I can just put that to you, Mark, about how you found trying to get leaders on board with this and shape the system in a way that supports it, and then maybe something on councillors as well. And Donna, it'd be great to get your thoughts too.
Okay, I'm going to start with the easy one. Politically, it was a lot easier than it was executively, because members get this by and large. You know, why wouldn't we want to understand people and help them out? I mean, because they're not necessarily involved in the intricacies of service design, they're able to continue to be more pragmatic. At least I'm finding this. So I've never really had a problem with the members. They will say things like, what happens if it goes wrong? So we'll come on to that in a moment. But yeah, I think just being clear and visible with the members and just being clear on purpose. What is our purpose? And if you can describe that from the point of view of the people that are out there, you know, we're trying to help people to access their own capability to thrive, because when we do that, actually they need us less, but when they do need us, it's adding value, it's not waste. Members will be like, well, why wouldn't we do this? And what they love as well is the fact that we know it can't be done without partners. One thing I didn't really say is in Changing Future Northumbria, we've got a lot of partners who are hooked into this, both voluntary and public sector partners. And members are essentially saying, great, well, they're almost with us in the sense of holding feet to the flames around things like governance. So in terms of the challenges that we've had, yeah, I've got quite a few scars. I'm not just talking about the current work, but going back when we started this, we did our first piece of work on debt in 2018. So I've been called reckless, irresponsible, dangerous, all those sorts of things. None of those things have come to pass. And they've all been people who were scared. And it's easy to take that stuff personally. What we had recently was someone around, you're not a professional, we're the commission service and we're the professional. How dare you work with this person? We've been building up their getting them to this point for 4 years. So I asked, what is this point? Oh, well, they know now not to call us after 4 o'clock. Oh, right. Okay, well done. And actually, when we studied her history, sadly, lots of horrible things were happening after 4 o'clock. So what we were able to do is not just beat them over the head and say, you're wrong, we're right. It was a case of saying, based on what we've understood rather than assessed, how do you see this now and how can we help you? So what we do is kind of create a bit of dissonance. People get angry, but they turn that anger into, what can I do, as opposed to, bugger off, you're a threat. But you're initially getting that. The trick is to hold your nerve and just help people to see it totally. So to offer that kind of ability to say, well, come and see it. We're not going to argue with you in a room. Come and talk to us. And what we're finding is that people have gone totally the other way. They've gone from massive resistance to, actually, when you do pull on us, so take social care, they're still mixed there, but when we pull on social workers, what they're now saying, those that know us, is when you do pull, we've got more information. So we were actually making better decisions than we did before. So it's turning it into an opportunity and holding your nerve and not taking it personally, because it can be horrible. But if you're doing the right thing and you're showing you're working and admitting where it didn't work, you kind of get there. It's messy and it's attritional, but that's the only way we're going to do it.
That's great, Mark. Thank you very much. Donna, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I had similar experiences to Mark, even when I was the chief exec at the CCG and the council, for the different approach. But again, my argument was always, what is the worst that can happen? And at the time, we had to make huge amounts of savings and outcomes were not great. We were really expensive for a lot of services, but they weren't good. So I don't think throwing a load of money, if we get a new government who's going to throw a load of money at public services, that's actually the right thing to do. I think it's that rethinking that needs to go alongside additional investment. I think additional investment is needed, but in the right things, not just in creating more silos or more eligibility criteria. That's really what we sometimes tend to do. Or another project, for God's sake, can we ban projects and pilots and pathfinders? They don't work. What Mark's done and what we did in Wigan was roll it out at scale and at pace across all aspects of services. The biggest challenge I had was children's services, like Mark described. You're not the professional, stay out of my hair. So eventually we needed to change leadership to leadership that got it, that leadership that really got it. And I was in a lucky position because I was chief exec, but not everyone is. I think just on the local dimension, very often people think you can't do anything because there's no money, and they blame Westminster. Westminster needs to give us more money. And, one of the things that I like Mark has put on Twitter quite a lot is we can do this without Westminster. This is how we organise ourselves locally. And we just need to get on with it and do it. So I think removing the resistors, holding your nerve, building that rebel alliance of people who just can see where everything's going wrong and get leaders across the NHS. It's more difficult, I think, to get that type of leadership in NHS England, because of that top-down transactional nature rather than the locally accountable, even with ICSs. So getting passionate advocates of this within NHS trusts, mental health trusts in particular. We've got a huge crisis of mental health in this country, haven't we? Your slides have demonstrated that. And this liberated method, I think, will work best for them and with acute systems. So let's just do it. What's stopping us?
Thank you, Donna. Right, I've got
one really quick thing in.
Really quick, because there's tons of questions, Mark, that I want to try and get through.
When we studied what the workers were doing that was different and better, 60% of it didn't require any system change whatsoever. It was agnostic of the system. So to say that system change is the only way we're going to crack this, we've got the data to suggest otherwise. So we can do 60% of this on Monday.
Yes, I read that as one of your kind of catchphrases. We can do this on Monday. Why not? So I've got lots of questions here. I'm going to do my best to get through them. So Mark and Donna, if you can keep your answers short and sharp. That point that Donna made there, and you said before we actually went live, Mark, about not being interested in doing projects. One of the questions is about how do you move from a project-based system to business as usual? Are there a couple of quick hints that you could give on that?
Well, that's what we're actually doing at the moment. So we're not at the other side of that yet. But I think it's to understand that if you can describe the problems in totality and make it clear that none of the problems are the same shape as any single organisation. No organisation, well, that's us. If you can describe the problems in a transcendent way and attach the money to it, this is why we did all that analysis, that will get people's attention. Then you can start working on actual problems rather than starting with services. So start with real issues, not services. How are we going to solve delayed discharges rather than how can we make the hospital more efficient? How
Fantastic.
do we, just keep it outside in, not inside out.
Yeah, lovely. And then Donna, one for you. There's a question in about what national policy could do, or what national policy making might be able to support this. I know that's a very difficult question to put you on the spot for, but I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think adopting a total place approach and, basically giving a financial settlement for a system and a place, rather than having it delineated between health, social care, local government, public health. They're all separate allocations. So basically saying, this is the resource, adopt a liberated method to spend it wisely, focus on people, and then just do it and step back. I have my doubts as to whether that will ever come to fruition, but I think that's what's needed. Total place was ace, wasn't it?
It was. Mark, there's a question here from somebody who's working in autism, LD, health and social care, wondering how on earth they get, the exact words were, how on earth they get involved in this type of work.
Interestingly, we're about to start a piece of work in the new year with the Mental Health Trust up in the Northeast around people that are regularly turning up to or are stuck in mental health settings, including people with autism. So if the person wants to contact me, it'd be fantastic because what we want to do is build up a learning community as well as a doing community. So get involved through helping us to learn and also learning from what we're doing. So I know it's a rather glib answer, but just get in touch. Yeah, we're interested in working with fellow travellers for sure. Everyone's got something to offer here.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a really good question here about doing this at scale. And the question was just around clarifying where you're at in your journey with the Liberated Method and Changing Futures Northumbria, and then maybe what some of the things Donna has in mind when you were talking about doing things more at scale, because doing a pilot is one thing, getting it broadly adopted is another.
Yeah, I mean, we have not cracked that yet. We're working across the region, and we're working in multiple sites in different settings, and there's a whole lot of really great work going on. But what we want to do is move the entire sort of system to this, the ecosystem. Actually, one of the things that we're proposing, it's in one of those papers, is that we set this Institute for Prevention and Reform up. It provides resources and capability, but doesn't dictate. I don't think it should be permanent. I think 5 to 10 years of building capability in organisations so they can do themselves. But so what we're lobbying for and creating evidence for is for the devolved authority in the Northeast, the Mayoral Combined Authority, to have this in it. But not just within the Combined Authority. We'd like to connect it to the ICB. We'd like to build in multiple partners to create something that's owned by everyone and no one, because we can't just do it in operations. As I said, it's got to work in leadership, the way we commission, the way that money not just is spent, but how it moves, all of that kind of stuff. We have not cracked that. So I don't think we can say that we've rolled this out at scale yet, but what we can say is that we've scaled it up enough to know that it's robust. So that's work in progress. Now, what needs to happen is the local politicians, or the chief execs and the leaders of the 7 local authorities in the Northeast, they're currently putting together a list of reform things which are probably on their minds. And what I'm saying is it needs to be transcendent of that. And this method needs to be deployed on problems that society has, not problems that councils have. So if we can do that, we're in business. So that's what we're working towards at the moment.
Thank you, Mark. Donna, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, just 2 things, I think, to roll it out at scale. One is to engage communities more effectively than we do at the moment in public service reform. Very often we keep them out. You can't trust them. Remember, that's what they used to say in Wigan. You can't trust them, Donna. Don't give them any money. Don't give them any freedom. But I think engaging them and investing in prevention in the social infrastructure of a place, I think is essential that we do that. That's how we managed to add 7 years of an additional healthy life expectancy in the most deprived wards. It wasn't changing the way we did services, it was putting money into community preventative projects. And then secondly, I think it's about behaviours of public servants. So I love Mark's idea of an academy, because I think what needs to change right from the day people decide they want to go into public services, whatever the role is, NHS, council, DWP, criminal justice, whatever, we need to think about behaviours and how they work with, how we relate to people. Relational working is totally different to transactional working. And the way we train, the way we recruit, the way we retain people is all transactional. I don't know if people saw in the Health Service Journal this week, there was a chief exec of an integrated care system, I won't say where, who was blaming people for not having the right skills to make efficiency savings in his system. And I thought, that's ridiculous. Just do the Liberated Method. That's where the money is. Just do it. Trust people. It's about shifting trust. It's about shifting management to not being about telling people what to do, but freeing people up.
Thank you, Donna. So I'm going to bring a couple of questions together here, and this actually reflects a discussion the three of us have had already. It's about how you get started with this. So some people are asking, can you do this at small scale first to get going? And I know when I was asking you about this, Mark, the way I asked it suggested should we start one service in one service area, and you immediately said it's not about the services, it's about the people. But is there a way of picking an area like, somebody has asked a question about, could you focus on children and families, for instance, and try and build something around that rather than kind of looking at the whole array of vulnerable people that public services supports?
I suppose my instinctive response is to start somewhere but be prepared to go everywhere, because if you're working genuinely outwards from people, and one of our principles is that the relationship between the worker and the citizen sets the scope, then that scope will take you where it takes you, and if it will take you beyond the auspices of any service design, and it will do it really quickly. So by all means have a kind of entry point, provided that it's seen as an entry point as opposed to the boundary. So there's a world of difference between the gate and the edge. So the gate might be the people that are presenting into here, or the people that are known to here, but the edge is wherever it takes you. So if you're working with, for example, if you're working with children and families, it's very likely that you're going to end up supporting the parents every bit as much as the child, if not more. That might take you into things around debt. That might take you into things around mental health. It will take you into all sorts of other places. And if we're going to be bespoke by default, we have to do that. So I would say be pragmatic about a start point, but be really ambitious about where it takes you. It should never take you out of scope if it's derived from the work. And that way, if you create this method, because our 4 touch points where we're working with, one in women's services, one in A&E, one around alcohol, and one around homelessness, but those touch points are pretty much all that differentiate them. Once we get to know people, the work is broadly the same, and that's the reason we wanted to have different touch points, so we could actually work out if that's true. And what we're seeing is, yeah, it is. It's broadly the same work. So as long as you accept that, then absolutely choose a start point that you know and you care about, and then expand it from there. Or choose a start point that has political opportunism. Our first work was in debt, council tax. People owe us a bunch of money. We keep sending a bailiff around. It's not very helpful. What should we do instead? Why don't we turn up and get to know them a bit? And that went poof and became about more things than debt very, very quickly. So as long as that caveat around scope is in there, yeah, absolutely start somewhere specific and bound, but let it take you where it takes you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. And just if you want to hear more about that story about how Mark started looking at council debt, the Radical Reformers podcast conversation we had goes into that in a lot of detail. Donna, is there anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think start by, as Mark did in the start of this presentation, describing the problem really clearly, because people need to know the scale of the problem and know that it's not about just loads more money pumped into that dysfunctional system. that will not work. Because I think people are kind of getting a bit giddy, aren't they, about a new government? Oh, we've got loads of money we're going to have loads of money. Well, even if we did, it's just not going to work if we don't change it and fundamentally reform it. So I think describe the problem. Don't just keep describing the bloody problem. I am sick of going to meetings where people describe the problem and the next month they describe it again. We've got to do something about it. And, Mark's just explained what we can do. And then secondly, I think we need some very simple, compelling narrative to tie it together across all services, like Mark's got, like we had with the Wigan deal. It's a social contract between citizen and state. I get that narrative co-produced with local citizens, with public servants like Mark's done, and embed it. I think that's the starting point. We started in adult social care because it was a bloody mess.
So just last question. So there's a few people asking about how to influence in this. So how do you engage with your council to try and get them on board with this? And I know that we've covered a lot of this, and we've got a couple of minutes, but just are there one or two top tips for doing that, Mark?
Yeah, I think there's something about stating a problem in a different way that makes it compelling. I think that's why we did the burning platform work. So that's one thing about it. The other thing is to deal with stories as well as data. It's really, really important, and they're not our stories, they're the stories from communities. And I know that can sound a bit trite, but if they're the right stories, it's like Donna said earlier on, you look at some of those things and it's chastening. And don't be afraid to be chastening. Don't be afraid to go there, because there's a pull and a push here, I would argue. Yeah. The push is how broken it is, and be articulate about that. But the pull is, we could do this. We've got the capabilities, the sensitivities, the relationships, and the resources by and large to do this. The difficulty is the transition, because it's so hard. You can't turn demand off while you're trying to do different things. So it does need to be an investment in it. But that kind of push and pull, what's going to attract, but what's going to push away, work on both and do it compellingly.
Thank you. And Donna, I'll give you the last word.
I think just be challenging. I know I keep going on about this Rebel Alliance, but it only takes a few people to really change an organisation or a system mindset. So be tenacious, be radical. Looking back in 10 years, what do we want to have achieved? Do we still want that John scenario? That's soul destroying, isn't it? So let's be brave and courageous and do it.
Thank you very much. And our time is more or less up. So thank you so much to Donna and Mark. That's been a fantastic discussion. I've learned a lot. And also to everybody who's joined. It's really good of you all to make time for this. Just a couple of quick follow-up things. We'll send out an email after this. Mark, a few people have asked if you're okay to share some of those, a version of those slides. And some...
I'll put a version together that's shareable and send it to you. Yeah.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much. What we will also do is make this recording available so you can share with colleagues, and please do share widely. And I'll also put links to the podcast interviews with Donna and Mark so you can hear from them in a bit more detail. But it's 12 o'clock on the dot, so I'm going to bring us to a close and thank everybody again. Thank you very much.